Remember, we are talking about testimony, which is a very important component of our lives. Even our worship this morning is testimony. But then one of the things that will shock you is that worship was never meant for your activation. Worship, no song is dedicated for your activation. That was the wrongness of the performance-based ministry. That is the wrongness of the gifts that overtook priesthood, that overtook the altar. Anything that you do on the altar is offered unto God. So if it is worship, first and foremost, it is offered unto God. It activates the altar. When the altar is activated, then you get activated. It doesn't start with you. No song is meant for you. No song is meant for your spirit. Every song is supposed to be an offering at the altar. It's supposed to be my testimony. Every song is supposed to enforce the cross verdicts. Because when we sing like we have sung about the crucifixion of the Lamb, and we have gone through the entire Isaiah 53, and we are proclaiming those things, we are enforcing the verdict. We are all priests. No priest will minister without an offering. No priest will minister outside the altar. And any business that is done on the altar, it is the business of our God. We got to enforce those things. We got to change our attitude towards songs. We got to change our posture in a time of worship. Because no worship is meant for you. It's not meant for you. And if you are a priest, and we've been talking about priest mediation, that if it doesn't matter how powerful the covenant can be, if there's no priestly mediation, that thing will never come to pass. If there is no priest standing at the altar, activating the covenant realities that are there in the blood, and I say the priest will always come before God carrying the blood. Any priest coming before God carries the covenant, carries the testimony. We are all priests, but we need to come out of something that we condemned. During the courtroom commission, we repented, having promoted gifts above priesthood and having been performance-based instead of covenant-based. And we are really doing everything possible to step out of performance, because performance is like to tell me that what you do is what blesses you. What you do is what activates you, and not the altar activating you. That's where the wrongness is coming in, because our understanding of the altar is so small that we have belittled the altar in our eyes and promoted our gifts and promoted our performance more than the altar. And any business you do outside the altar is illegal. In the presence of God, your bells cannot be heard in the spirit. Remember how the priest was adorned, and he had a whole robe upon himself, and on the hem of that robe were bells and the fruits. If the bell was not heard in the spiritual realm, it was a clear sign that whatever they are doing on earth is illegal. If the sound is not heard in the heavens, it simply means these people have violated the protocol. This priest has violated the protocol. In other words, this priest is not recognizing the blood. This priest is not recognizing the altar. This priest is not recognizing the priesthood. Actually, the condemnation came if he stepped into that altar and was not clothed in the garments of the priest, meaning this guy is legally uncovered. He is insufficient. These covenant garments of the priest is what gave him acceptance. And if he stood and he carried the bowl of the blood, and he carried the testimony, the covenant, around himself as he ministered. By the way, people put the confidence in the altar. The priest was just meant to activate the altar. And the moment we all come to understand what the courtroom commissioning on 15th June 2025 produced, The first thing, and when I gave you that small book, you will realize what is more amplified than anything else is the activation of the altar. Activation of the altar. What governs the land is not gifts of people. What governs the land is a powerful activated altar. What changes the land? It is altar realities. And that's why no land, no government, no territory rules or reigns today without an altar. It is you who is not aware. Even you only need to walk across in the land of banana, and you can tell the altar that governs this land, the lawlessness, the all things that you see around. And when now God declared, out of our courtroom commissioning, I have mounted an altar, and that altar is aligned to the eternal altar. And that altar is speaking. You got to begin to put your confidence more on the altar that God activated. It is only us, and we repented of that sin. We repented of that evil, where we replaced the altar with our gifts, and we replaced the covenant with our performance. And we thought the things we do, this is just operating outside what Christ has accomplished. Because the only thing that puts you, and I think that was the last vision that we had, where people are living in their small tents, yet there is a whole eternal covenant architecture where God has fully done everything that you require. And there were wide doors that were open, and there was a scroll. Every one of us was given as they entered. And we defined the small tent as your self-effort, your self-covering. Because most of us still want to come before the Lord with their self-covering. They don't want to come before the Lord through the covering of the covenant, through the covering of the blood. And that's where we go wrong. Anything you do outside the blood, and we repented, having offered prayers that bypass the blood, having offered worship that is outside the blood, coming to stand here and do anything or where you are outside the blood is an irregularity. And that's why you need to begin to ask yourself, in anything that you are doing, is the sound of my priesthood being heard in heaven? Is my bell ringing in heaven? And anytime heaven hears those bells, there are clear indication that that is a legal offering that is being done. That is a legal operation. They have not violated the legal protocols. And what are the legal protocols? There is an altar. And an altar never came into being without covenant. An altar never came being without the blood. So to come into the presence of the Lord outside the context of the blood, outside the context of the covenant that is supposed to cover you, not self-coverings. And that's why God made sure that priest is clothed. Because any other way you come before God, you are naked. No matter how righteous you are naked. That's why you cover yourself with the covenant. And covenant is, faithful is the one who promised. Faithful is the one who made me a son. Faithful is the one who made me righteous. It is him who made me righteous by the death of his son. It is not my self-efforts that make me righteous. And anytime you walk into the presence of God with your self-covering, you're just like those tents that were pitched outside there. And people had to abandon those tents. They had to come into what Christ has fulfilled for them. And you'll come to discover our work will be easier as we continue. The time you will begin to know the power of the altar. The moment you begin to reverence the altar. The moment you begin to know what works is the altar. What heals is the altar. What makes me rich is the altar. I am as strong as the altar is. And I am as weak as the altar is. If the altar in your midst is weak altar, it doesn't matter how much you try, you will be weak. But if you are strong, if the altar is strong, and you know the altar becomes strong because number one, we don't violate the protocols, legal protocols, the blood, the cross, the priesthood, the testimony. We don't violate that. We don't bring performance before covenant. We don't put gifts before priesthood. And priesthood is very important because without priesthood, the altar cannot be activated. The altar will never operate by itself. And you know, we're saying these things because if you study the heavens critically, you realize the most central piece of architecture is eternal altar. Everything revolves around the altar. Even the throne of God itself revolves around the altar. Even the throne of God revolves around the altar. Altar is so important. Until there's an activity in the altar, the throne is dormant. Did you get me? Until there is an activity in the altar, the throne, no matter how omnipotent and how powerful it is rendered inactive because of simple things that God has taught us from the scriptures. It's until the priest entered with the blood, sprinkled on the altar, then sprinkled on the mercy seat. Then the mercy seat delivered the forgiveness, delivered the redemption. If there was no priest with the blood, then this throne of mercy becomes the throne of judgment. That is to tell you the most central thing in worship. The most central thing in worship is an altar. If we are mounting up an altar in this place, that's what will conquer all other illegal altars. When there was dysfunctionality in Israel, Elijah knew what he needed to do. He repaired the altar. Fire came down. Because it's all about an altar. It is not on the prophetic gifting that he had that fire came down. Fire came down because he restored the altar. So these words that God is telling us here that he has restored this altar. When we mounted the cross, when we erected the cross, the message that goes into the heavenly realm and the message that goes into the earthly realm and the message that goes into this entire territory is that the altar has been recovered. The altar is restored. The priesthood is restored. That's the message. It's not a piece of metal out there. The message, remember, that was legally enacted in a courtroom commissioning in heaven above at the eternal altar by the blood, by the covenant, and by the testimony. Tell me who is there to tell me why it cannot work. Show me, tell me if something is offered at the eternal altar, if there is a registration that is done at the eternal altar through the blood, through the covenant. Tell me why it shouldn't work. Tell me why it cannot work. If the altar is restored, and we said that anytime you see this red carpet, the first thing that gets into your mind is that this is an altar that is an extension of the eternal altar. And the businesses that are done at the eternal altar is registration. So if it is worship, it must be registration. If it is any prayer, it must be registration. And registration simply means you cannot do registration outside the altar. Anytime you see the priest carrying the bowl of blood, that is a registration. Registration means it's a legal thing, it's a legal process. He is presenting this blood as legal evidence so that the court can rule, so that the court can decide in favor of the evidence that is produced there. But you know what? Let me say this. We are all coming, and we repented this. That we lived in an environment we marginalized the cross. We bypassed the blood. We made the altar dysfunctional when we promoted gifts and we promoted men. What should be in your heart right now is not what I say, but what this altar is capable of. Me, I'm only a priest activating the altar. What will change you is not the words that I speak. Just like I say, the songs that we sing are the ones that activates that altar. And when the altar is activated, activation was like when he said back in the day that I want to make sure the fire on this altar will never be put out. Songs are not for you. How do you trust the wood, the firewood that is supposed to produce the fire, instead of the fire that comes from the altar? How do I trust a song? Instead of what the song does, when it is offered through the blood, offered through the covenant, offered through the testimony, it activates the altar. It lights up the fire. That fire is what should come into me, not because of the song. The song only helped me to light up the fire. And I cannot trust that which is supposed to light the fire more than the fire itself. And fire will never come out until the altar is restored. Elijah's story will tell you that. I am praying because this is the restoration we are saying. The reason I rejoice when we sing this song, rejoice when you see the Lord restore Zion, is because when this revelation was lacking, the church was lost. The priesthood was lost. The altar was desecrated. We entered into a stage of powerless priesthood because even people never understood priesthood. They understand gifts more than priesthood. That's why they will grab titles. And you see, we came into an apostolic era. While it never emphasized, it pretended not to emphasize the gift. How do you trust the apostle more than the altar where the apostle ministers? How do you trust the priest more than the altar that actually activated him to minister? It is the reason for this altar, that's why we are here. And let me tell you, you make it weak, you can be stronger than the altar. You make it strong, then you will be strong. It is the core of every activity. If it is the most central piece of architecture in the heavens above, so should that be the most central thing in the earth? And it's true. You don't start businesses without an altar. I sent Anthony and the elders to come to you so that your businesses and your professions are founded on the altar. Because if it's not founded on the altar, the enemy will contest it. The enemy will divert it. The enemy will find a legal ground to oppose that business or to oppose that career. And the whole exercise was put Make sure everything begins at the altar. Why are marriages solemnized? Weddings in a wedding. So that the union of those people begins at the altar. And it is covered by the covenant. And that will take away the crises that are there. You are as strong as this altar is. I wish we can quit so many spiritual useless activities and begin to do the right thing, build our faith, build our confidence on the altar. Ever since we started to do this, I stopped prayers in my house. Can't remember the last time we prayed together. Because I need to get this architecture clearly without distortions of the past. So that the next time we enter to pray as a family, I want people to see the family altar first. Not the oratory gift as I pray. And that's why you've got to understand God is, we're trying to really say, you cannot be, when we launched Bezalel hardware, heritage, what did we do? We mounted the altar first. Because what empowers the business if not the altar? In the same way, what empowers your career if not the altar? And this is not a place we come to. There's something you carry. You have the consciousness that I am part of an altar, just like a Levite. Even when they were not in the tent of the meeting, they knew there were ministers in the altar. You don't have to come here every day, but you have to know that what fuels your family, what empowers your life, what empowers your marriage, your business, what fuels your life is the altar. Is the altar. I think the more we look at the courtroom commissioning, the more it marvels me. We only stood for 40 minutes, said things very, very fast. But thank God we say those things at the eternal courts. We say those things at the eternal altar. We say those things by the blood of the Lamb. It amazes me the level of impact that has to be experienced and seen, including 4 or 5 now important judicial confirmations. You know why? Do you know why the 2 lanes became one? Do you know why the umbilical cord was cut? Do you know why the title deeds were delivered? Do you know why the golden ring was recovered from the trash? It is because of the restoration of the altar. It's because of the restoration of the altar. It's not because of anything. It's because of the restoration of the altar and restoration of the priesthood. I may not get here, but I need to say this. One, I know we don't know this, but the reason why Adam failed, Adam was both a priest and a king of Eden, a priest of and king of Eden. But we only read about his kingship. He could rule, he could govern. But this is a guy, there's no record he ever offered any offering or any sacrifice. In fact, his sons had a record of some offerings they offered. When this guy, and because of lack of the altar, sin overtook him. Because of lack of the altar, he lost the kingship. Because it's the altar that was supposed to fuel and empower his kingship. He failed because of what we call priesthood neglect. He neglected the altar. You tell me, even when he sinned, instead of taking an offering at the altar, he is hiding. He is hiding in the thistles, in the branches there, instead of going to the altar. Because what is the purpose of the altar? It was instituted that if you sin, there can be atonement through the blood. That the blood can speak on your behalf if you offer it. The blood can speak on your behalf if you offer it. The blood can speak on your behalf if you offer it. And that's why we're coming out from the confusion that we were caught up in, where we were told only drink the blood. If you don't apply the blood, and we apply that blood at the eternal courts, anytime we're saying we present our evidence, we are applying the blood. It's an external activity of applying the blood, the same way the Israelites applied the blood on the door rentiers, because that blood is what speaks at the altar. It's not the priest who is heard speaking at the altar. It is the blood that speaks, if it is a true altar, because you can't talk about altar without blood. Can you? Can't talk about an altar without blood. Can't talk about altars without blood. Can't talk about altars without blood. Altars are activated by the blood, whether it is positive altars, true righteous altars, or whether are demonic altars, satanic altars, will always require the blood, because it's the blood that speaks in the altars. And then you silence the blood here. Then you have no evidence. You have no witness at the eternal courts. Satan's accusations remain unchecked, because that blood, as it speaks at the altar, it covers you. It speaks of your righteousness. It speaks of your penalty that it paid. It speaks of your acceptance before God. No matter how many accusations the enemy can bring against you, that blood speaks. I have a zeal in my heart, and I want to turn this thing around. That the thing that stands out in our hearts is the altar. And all of us are called to be priests in that altar. And I told you on Sunday, no priest ministers without the blood, without the covenant, without the testimony. And of course, no priest ministers outside the altar. Where did we lose it? That you saw the gift in a man and not the altar. So when I sing that song, my God reigns, our God reigns, see him restoring Zion. Zion is an altar. And we have been told very clearly, this is where you have come. If you look at that description in Hebrews chapter 12, it speaks more of the altar. This is where you have come. You have come to New Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands and thousands of angels in a holy assembly. You have come to the spirit of the righteous made perfect, whose names, you have come to the church of firstborns, whose names have been written in the Lamb's book of life. And you have come to God, the judge of all men. And you have come to Christ, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. The church must return there. This is where you have come, where the blood speaks more than the minister, where the blood speaks more than the gift of a person, where you allow the blood to speak. Don't overshadow the blood. Don't overshadow the blood. By the way, if anything, I see all the gifts are within the priestly robe. And priestly robe is a covenant robe. It's a covenant robe. It came through the blood. So any gifts offered outside that context, the bells will not be heard in heaven. And that is presumed you are dead. Because anytime there was an activity at the altar and bells are not heard in heaven, heaven registered that one as an illegal activity. And you are struck by judgment immediately. Today we don't die physically, but we die in power. We die in authority. We die. We lack spiritual authority. You make decrees that have no impact. You make useless prayers that the courtroom in heaven or the eternal altar cannot recognize. You get into a situation where the enemy's accusations prevail over a church like this one, because we bypassed the altar. We bypassed the priesthood. We bypassed the blood. So courtroom commissioning restored all these things. I'm happy because this has always been my cry in my heart. I didn't know how to turn it around. I didn't know how to turn this mess around. I didn't know how to return to covenant. I didn't know. Thank God for courtroom commissioning. Courtroom commissioning restored all those things in an instance. Restored the blood. Restored the cross. Restored the altar. Restored the priesthood. And connected the altar to eternal priesthood. Please, drop all those other spiritual gimmicks and activities. Accept the courtroom commissioning as the beginning of your life, where now you are operating under a legal protocol that is recognized in heaven above. Matters altar are not just spiritual but legal. Yes, matters altar are not just spiritual but legal. That's why an animal dies for your sake. That's a legal transaction. That is paying for your penalty. You need to be judged, but an animal dies. But you don't bring any animal. You apply the blood. You come before the Lord by the blood, because altars are activated by the blood. And if there is any worship, let that worship be a testimony. The testimony we give, and testimony enforces evidence. Just in a court of law, your testimony enforces the evidence. If you're told, I want you to give a testimony at the courts, there's already evidence presented. So you stand here to testify in alignment to the evidence. There's evidence already supplied. The blood of Jesus is the evidence. Your testimony is any words you speak in support, in alignment, in favor. So if you say, our God reigns, that's a testimony. When you say that blood, see the blood, that song was taking us to Isaiah 53, how like a sheep before the shearer, he was silent, that's a testimony. You are already speaking in alignment with the evidence. Tell me, won't the eternal courts respond? I have notes here, I don't know how to arrive there. To tell you, if that doesn't happen, then our activity is an illegality. And for me, I didn't know how to turn it around after 25 years of illegality. Because even back then, even before we joined these apostolic things, it's not that we understood the blood so much. It's not that we understood the cross so much. It's not that we understood the altars so much. We were still actually, how I functioned in Banana, it was a promotion of a gift and people gathered around the gift of a person, but not the altar from where he ministers.